Do your brakes sound like this? If so, then it's time to change them. If you're doing this one axle at a time, then start with chocking the wheels that are going to stay on the ground. Loosen the lug nuts with the wheels still on the ground. I chose to start with the rear. When lifting the rear axle of the GX470, make sure that you position the jack directly under the differential. Place your jack stands under the axle for support and make sure you release the handbrake. Fully remove the lug nuts and take the wheel off of the hub. Using a 17mm socket and ratchet, remove the two bolts that secure the caliper to the carrier bracket. Once the slide pin bolts are removed, set the caliper on top of the hub. Make sure that you do not hang the caliper by the brake line. Remove the brake pads from the carrier bracket. Using your 17mm socket and ratchet again, remove the bolts holding the mounting bracket to the hub. Removing these bolts took a tremendous amount of force for me, so I would recommend using PB Blaster or some other similar penetrating fluid. Once the bolts are loose, remove the carrier bracket from the hub. You can use any M8 by 1.25 bolt to push the rotor away from the hub at this point, but that's a very boring way to do this. I prefer a good hammer. I opted for a complete replacement kit from R1 Concepts. It includes front and rear pads, 4 rotors, and all the associated hardware. You can find the link in the description to check them out for yourself. The rotors in this kit are painted, so they don't need to be sprayed with brake cleaner. Take your first rear rotor and mount it on the hub. Take the mounting bracket and remove the old brake pad mounting shims. Replace them with the new hardware that comes in the kit. This can be a little bit finicky and very dusty, so have a little patience. Next, unwrap your first set of rear pads. Fit the brake pads onto the mounting bracket. Make sure to leave enough space in between the pads to slip over the rotor. Fit the bracket over the rotor with the pads attached and line it up with the bolt holes at the back. Hand thread the bolts and then tighten them back up with your 17mm socket and ratchet. Using a torque wrench, tighten the bolts down to 77 foot-pounds. Open the hood and remove the cap from the brake fluid reservoir. Hold the brake caliper upright with the piston on the bottom. Place an old brake pad on top of the piston and using a C-clamp, gently squeeze the piston until it's completely open. Reinstall the brake caliper over the brake pads and rethread the slide bolts holding it in place. Using your torque wrench, tighten these bolts down to 65 foot-pounds. Carefully lift the wheel back onto the hub and thread the lug nuts to hold it there. Remove the jack stands from under the axle and carefully lower the jack until the vehicle is on the ground. Finally, set your torque wrench from 82 to 85 foot-pounds and tighten the lug nuts in a star pattern. Repeat these steps for the opposite wheel on the same axle. Next, we're going to work on the front axle, so start by chalking the rear wheels. Same as before, loosen the lug nuts before jacking up the front axle. Jack up the front axle by the jack point that's located in the center of the subframe. Place a jack stand under the control arm of the wheel that you are working on. Now we can fully remove the lug nuts and take the wheel off of the hub. There are two cotter pins holding in the slide pins on the caliper. Using a needle nose pliers, remove them from the slide pins. Looped around the bottom slide pin is the return spring clip. Unseat it from between the brake pads and this will allow the slide pin to be removed much easier. If the slide pin is stuck, you can try spraying it with some lubricant like WD-40, or you can try tapping it from the inside to get it to come loose. You can see here that mine was particularly difficult to remove, so feel free to try whatever tool you think will work. Next, we're going to remove the bolts holding the caliper to the knuckle. This will require significant effort because the torque spec on these bolts is 91 foot-pounds. I recommend using a breaker bar. I had to use my torque wrench because I didn't have a breaker bar handy, but I do not recommend using your torque wrench because you could damage it and affect its accuracy. Once the bolts are removed, you will need to remove the caliper from the rotor. I also found this to be quite a difficult job and I had to get the hammer involved. With the caliper loose, remove the pads from between the pistons. Be careful about moving the caliper too much as the brake line going to the caliper is a hard line. If it bends too much, it could get pinched and stop the brake fluid from flowing. There unfortunately don't appear to be any extra bolt holes to assist you getting this disc brake off, so you'll have to get it off the hub by any means necessary. I used a little bit of penetrating fluid on each of the studs and around the hub in order to try to separate the brake disc from the hub. You're allowed to do pretty much whatever's necessary to get it off. I wanted to pause here and let you know that this next step is much simpler if you have a specialty tool called a caliper spreader. They're about $25 on Amazon, and it's well worth the cost for the amount of headache and time that it'll save you. I put a link in the description to the one that I purchased shortly after completing this job, so I'll never have to do this again. If you don't have a caliper spreader, then grab an old brake pad and put it across one side of the piston, and use a C-clamp to compress the piston until it's all the way open. Once one side is all the way open, then repeat these steps for the other side until the caliper is completely open. Once the caliper pistons are all the way open, fit your new disc rotor onto the hub. Use a lug nut to hold it in place if necessary. Slide the caliper back over the rotor and thread the bolts holding it in place. Slide your new brake pads into the back of the caliper in between the piston and the rotor. Make sure that the brake surface is what's facing the rotor. If you're having difficulty fitting it in by hand, gently tap the pad into place. Insert the top slide pin and secure it with a cotter pin. Next, install the retaining clip between the two brake pads. Now install the bottom slide pin, but make sure that you feed it through the retaining clip. Secure this slide pin with its own cotter pin. Finish reinstalling the caliper by torquing the caliper bolts down to 91 foot-pounds. Reinstall the wheel on the hub and torque the lug nuts down to 82 to 85 foot-pounds. Make sure to torque the lug nuts in a star pattern. Remove the jack stands from under the car and lower it to the ground. Finally, replace the cap to the brake fluid reservoir and shut the hood of the truck. Make sure to pump the brake pedal a couple of times until it firms up, and don't forget to bed the brakes for maximum performance.